to get involved, there's a place, and don't be afraid to approach the executive committee or somebody who's chair of any one of the committees, of all those names that are on the STP website. If you scroll through and click everything, there's a place, and I think, for high school teachers, for community college, we're all just teachers.
You've just heard Diane Finley, STP's 2023 president, talk about the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. My podcast partner, Eric Landrum, had the opportunity to interview Diane at STP's annual conference on teaching in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in fall 2022. We hope you enjoy this interview. Our thanks to Diane Finley, to the Society for the Teaching of Psychology, and ACT Director Lindsay Maslin for making this possible. Now please enjoy.
Welcome to another episode of Psych Sessions. I'm thrilled to be here with a good and do I say old friend? She's not old, but she's an old friend of mine, Diane Finley. Hi, Diane.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Diane, from Prince George's Community College.
Yes.
I'm not going to get the city in Maryland correct. I'm sorry.
Largo.
Thank you very much. And so thank you for taking time out of ACT 2022. And I always want to say thank you to STP and ACT Director Lindsay Maslin for the room that we're in. We're very thankful for Psych Sessions to have that. So it's an exciting conference for you. Do you become president-elect at this convention?
No, because STP, and I don't know how many years ago, we went to a calendar year. So the terms run January through December, although I understand there's a passing of the gavel at the meeting because we sort of have semi-business here sort of thing. So I will not actually be here tomorrow when that occurs because I have to leave early. Nobody mentioned that before last night. And so I understand, and I think they passed the gavel just because it's the last time before the calendar year that you're going to see anybody and stuff. And so they do that. I believe that STP is going to start running their own elections except for the Council of Reps for APA. And so we won't have to be on APA's election schedule, which is always done in June. So you get elected. So I was president-elect for 6 months before I actually became president-elect. So we're trying to get it back on a little more understandable election schedule, but it's January through December term.
So your presidential year will begin January 1, 2023.
Yes,
is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you've had a very long reign as president-elect.
I did.
Okay, very cool. And but you've been a member of STP for quite a long time and a contributor for a long time.
Yes. I discovered STP by accident at an APA convention because I came out of a department where they knew I wanted to teach. That was always my aim going in. I just no longer wanted to teach high school. And to be a college teacher, you really needed a higher degree. And so I went and got my doctorate. I already had my master's. And so they knew that, but no one ever mentioned, and I was a teaching assistant, so we taught. I mean, we taught from the day we walked in the door, but no one ever mentioned really teaching post-doctorate, and they certainly never mentioned teaching at a small liberal arts or, God forbid, a community college. And so nobody really mentioned any of the organizations related to teaching, which at the time would have been STP. I came out of Department of Human Development in the College of Education, which really is developmental psychology. Mm-hmm. I had Nathan Fox for biological bases and almost knocked Jerome Kagan down one day because he was coming in the outdoor.
So you were at Harvard?
No, he was working with Nathan on a project.
Oh, okay.
I was at University of Maryland, and he and Nathan worked on projects together, and he barreled into the office through the exit door, and I'm going out the exit door, and I'm like, so whatever. But the department really, in terms of conferencing, did Society for Research in Child Development, SRCD.
That's right. Yeah.
And so I actually went to a few of those as a grad student, but STP was not doing the pre-conference workshop, so there was really nothing related to teaching there. It was all just research. And so I was at, and I don't remember which APA, because they also encouraged us to look at APA, and APS was just starting. I presented a poster at one of the very first APS conferences, and I can't remember the name of the person, the psychologist who was really big in sort of like educational psych. That's how long ago it's been. And he's going, well, are you going to publish that? And I thought, well, I'd love to publish that, but it's not like I just get to say, publish. It's published. And they're going, okay. So it was much more research, science oriented, which I understand. And, that's what they were. So I was at an APA, and I just stumbled across it. And as I think a lot of people do, or did when more people went to APA and stuff. And I volunteered, I graduated, went on to my first teaching job down in South Carolina, and I volunteered to serve on a task force on the syllabus, the predecessor of the syllabus project, when we did everything by snail mail. So was your first job teaching high school? Did I catch that correctly? Well, okay, I come from a really different background than most people.
Okay.
When I was in college, I was a political science journalist major, and I actually ran to be county delegate for the 1972 Democratic Convention. I knew my political science professor was the Democratic National Committee woman from Maryland. So she took us, we went and watched Congress, we worked dinners for some of the candidates. We did a lot of things that you would not normally get to do. And that was really my interest. I had worked for the Baltimore News-American in high school as a journalist. We had a really forward-thinking editor. It was a little magazine section on Sundays. He was a Pulitzer Prize winner, and he said, young people need a voice.
Wow.
And he started this section and hired high school. There were a couple of college students who worked there as well. We got paid, I believe, $1.25 an hour, which was the minimum wage back then. My parents would drive me to a local mall about 20 minutes from my house. I took the bus into the city. I walked probably a mile until we had the riots, at which point he called my parents and said, she's not coming back to the city until I call you back. But so I had publications in the News American, which has gone defunct quite a long time ago. And I just sort of stumbled into some of those opportunities. So I wanted to be a political journalist, much like Cokie Roberts, which
I know who that is.
Hopefully people know who she is. She's actually the daughter of the senator from Louisiana. I'm originally from Louisiana, and he got my brother his appointment to the military academy because Maryland was too competitive, and we went to their house. I just remember having big platters of shrimp because they were wealthy. I mean, we didn't have and stuff. She was not there. She was grown and working, but that was sort of my intention. And so I ran for this delegate. I knew I wouldn't win because my county at that point was very heavily farming. It's now not. There's not a piece of farmland left, I don't think. But so 6 old white men won, which was to be expected to be the delegates. But we did some other work within the campaigns, and I sort of got disgusted with politics and said, I don't think I want to do this anymore. For younger listeners, that was back in the days of Nixon and some of the other hijinks that were going on. And so I just said, that's not really what I want to do. I had enough credits to graduate as an English major, and my father had made me take the education courses to get certified because he said you can always get a job.
So you were an undergraduate by this time?
Yes.
Okay.
And so I got certified as a high school English teacher, taught high school English for a couple of years.
And what was the undergraduate institution?
I went to
U of M?
No, I went to Notre Dame, what is now Notre Dame of Maryland University. It was College of Notre Dame back then. Women's college. I actually started at Boston College. We were the first class of women to be in any school except for nursing and teaching. I didn't particularly like it. And at after exams, which were after Christmas back then, which was just really horrible, I was going to not go to college anymore. I was going to do something else. My father said, I don't care where you go. you're going somewhere. And back then, we listened to our parents. And he also said, I won't pay for it if you don't go now. So my best friend was at Notre Dame. So I sent in an application. And it was actually... And I was just talking to somebody today. We didn't realize what a good education, what leadership skills we gained from being at the women's college and doing everything until many years after the fact. So I really came to appreciate it much later. So I taught high school for a couple of years.
What subjects did you? English?
I taught English.
And journalism, perhaps?
I did not teach journalism. I did teach theater. I directed the plays.
Oh, my goodness. What did you direct? Do you remember anything?
The biggest one was Our Town, because we actually did it at St. John's College.
Our Town. What a classic.
And had to go into Baltimore to get a curtain to use on their stage. I taught at a small Catholic high school where the same order of nuns ran the high school as ran the college. So I'm sure there were some behind-the-scenes strings, but I've learned that a lot of times it's who you know that gets you places. I mean, I wasn't using them to get that job, but I enjoyed it. Actually, one of my students is now my orthopedic surgeon.
Wow.
And so now, mind you, I was 22 when I started teaching, and he was like a junior. So there's really not as much of an age difference as it sounds.
Course. No.
But it's just funny when you go, you're sitting there going, what kind of grades did he get?
Right.
Did he get good? The first time you see him, and you're like, did he get good grades? And obviously he did. I mean, he wouldn't have ever gotten into college to get into medical school.
How did he do in math, right?
Yeah. I mean, but yeah, I mean, and the funny thing is he'll keep talking when I see him about classmates that he had, and I'm just like, oh yeah, I have any clue who those are.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that kid. That's right.
And stuff. So then I decided that my brother was in the Army, and he was stationed in Germany. The Army ran flights for family of about $300 round trip to Germany. So I left the teaching job and backpacked around, used their condo or apartment as a base, and backpacked around Europe for 3 or 4 months.
Well, that's the classic thing. And, you were young at the time, and, it's
I had
explore the world.
Right, and I had I had saved up money from when I was working those 2 years, and had a year rail pass, had a pass for the hostels. I came back home, found some odd jobs, tutoring and doing all that kind of other stuff, and applied. And my father at that time, then we were living in Maryland, got transferred back to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, where Exxon had bought a plant in Maryland. And so he managed that for a couple of years, and then I don't know whether they sold it at that time or whether they just moved him back, because he was pretty high level in terms of management and employee relations and all that stuff. You would never know that, and I know that now looking back that it had to be, just because I know more about how all that works. So he got transferred back to Baton Rouge, and my youngest brother was going into his senior year in high school and didn't want to move back. So I moved back. So I moved to Maryland, took custody of him, taught high school again for a year. That was real interesting having I don't know, I was probably 24, and so I've got this 17-year-old for whom I have custody. So we had an interesting year sort of thing. I then decided what I really wanted to do was counseling, because I had a student come into my office one day, or classroom, and say, I just got kicked out of my house, what do I do? And I'm going, because that didn't happen in my experience and with my friends. I mean, I had friends who were troublemakers, but I didn't have anybody in my close circle where their parents would have kicked them out at age 15 or 16. I don't remember how old she was and stuff. So, I mean, I immediately called the counselor's office and got her down there and all that other sort of stuff. But I'm sitting there going, I don't know how to deal with this. So I decided to go back and get a degree in counseling.
And you already had your master's degree in education?
No, I got my master's in counseling.
Okay, gotcha.
So I was about 4 years out of college, and my parents are back in Louisiana, and at that time, I could go back as an in-state student in Louisiana, and my cousin got me a job on campus. I paid about $200 a semester to get my master's. So I'm sitting there weighing $20,000 a year at Maryland, $500, $600 a year at LSU. For me, there was no, I'm not going to do that. So I went back and got my master's down in Louisiana. And so then I started another career path.
Did you get licensed? I mean, so
we did not have licensing for counselors at that point. We didn't even have certification.
Okay.
Because this was a really long time ago. I was actually one of the first national NCCs, National Certified Counselors from the American Counseling Association, when they finally got the certification. I am, I suppose I still am. A few years later, I moved back to Maryland, and I was license eligible as a professional counselor. I was no longer doing counseling at that point, so I just never pursued it because it's too expensive and involved. So, and I forget what the designator was. Might have just been licensed counselor or licensed professional counselor. I don't remember. But I got hired as a campus minister because I had done some work in our student center there, and there was I had done my internship at the counseling center. What was University of Southwestern Louisiana is now University of Louisiana at Lafayette. Same school, but so we used to drive across the bayou to do an internship there once a week because, I mean, it was hard to find places that would let you do it. So I was in the regular counseling center. And again, I'm not really sure how all of this came about, but and down there is a very Catholic area. The parish, which is equivalent to a county, is probably, at that point, was probably about 85% Catholic. They used to run school buses from the outlying Catholic parishes to USL, and the Catholic Student Center was smack dab in the center of campus. They had a 100-year lease for $1.
Okay, that's a good deal if you can get it.
And so the students from all of the outlying towns and areas would use the Student Center as a lounge place to wait. The buses picked them up and dropped them off right in front of it, so it was sort of innate. But the pastor there decided he wanted somebody with counseling degree on staff because, I mean, this was really a long time ago. So it's pretty forward thinking. And I'm assuming, without knowing, that he may have talked to the director at the counseling center, and somehow that came about. And he was happy to he'd been my supervisor. He was happy to have me because he didn't have a female counselor. So he referred back and forth. He gave me a supervisor. So I worked there as a campus minister / counselor for a couple of years, sort of thing. But money was not great. And by then, my dad had retired, and my family moved back up to Maryland. And so, I mean, I had grandparents and stuff down there, and by then, the Deep South and I just didn't super mesh.
Well, yeah, you were growing up. You were becoming more mature
Well, attitudes and, I mean, so we're talking the 80s, 1980s, and it was still maybe not quite as, and not that I think the Northeast was as advanced as it should have been, but it certainly was a bit different than being in and I'm talking Deep South. So,
sure.
I just wasn't as comfortable being there. Moved back up to Maryland, and eventually ended up at the University of Maryland in the doctoral program because I decided I'd like to teach college. I liked the counseling stuff, but I really liked the workshops I was doing, which kind of were more teaching sorts of things. And I knew to teach college, I really needed the doctorate. So
you were doing workshops in Louisiana?
Yeah, as a campus minister. Because, I mean, I did individual counseling, but we did a lot of workshops. I did them.
Oh, you put them on?
I put them on.
Gotcha.
I was the presenter for the workshops on, I don't even remember all of the, how you get, if you work in those kind of places, you have to do workshops. And I probably did some of them for the counseling center and stuff.
You probably did like test anxiety.
And all kinds of, I did parenting ones because we were a parish as well as student center. So we had actually some real like normal families that weren't college students, sorts of things. So just whatever was needed. Mm-hmm. And I decided I liked those more than the individual one-on-one counseling with clients, which, is sort of why in teacher ed programs, they now put students in the classroom like before your senior year last semester when you student teach. So let's find out what it's about. Even though you practice on the counseling stuff when you're in a counseling program, it's not the same thing as sitting in an office and I wasn't counseling 8 hours a day because I had other duties as assigned. But it's a lot of hours of straight that kind of stuff, and it was just, I mean, I can do it. I've done it, but it was not my major interest.
Where along the way did you get interested in sports psychology?
Well, I had always been involved in sports. My dad was, I'm not sure whether he was actually All-American, but he was quarterback of Tulane in the 40s when they were really good.
Wow.
I had a professor at LSU in class, we have to go around and introduce ourselves, and he stopped. He said, "Are you related to Leonard Finley?" I said, "Yes, that's my dad." He said, "Oh my God, I used to go watch him play. He was marvelous." And I know he was really, really good. He went to high school and college and graduate school on athletic scholarships because he came from a single parent household, so there was no money. My grandmother ran a boarding house. But he was really good at athletics, and so that was going to be, there wasn't a lot for girls, I have to say. I didn't play a lot. I swam because he was also a swimmer and a diver, so we were going to do that whether we really wanted to or not. But there weren't a lot of organized sports for girls, but my brothers all played football and basketball and baseball. He coached a lot of the stuff. I mean, he was very involved in it. And then by the time my sister came along, she was playing soccer because they had sports for girls. It just was not a lot. I played a little bit of volleyball in 8th grade, but there just weren't the opportunities. But we went to everything. My parents we are a family. We were going to, go. They didn't say we're going to go support each other. They just said, the game, get in the car.
How many brothers and sisters, may I ask?
I have 4 brothers and 1 sister. I have 1 brother who's subsequently passed away.
Sure.
But because we're all getting older. But
so a family of 6.
Family of 6 kids. And
okay. And you said you were a swimmer. What were your events?
I swam butterfly and I swam the individual medley. I was no good. And I swam all the way up through college. I never really won anything except in the meet where, when you swam age group, there was a meet at the end of the season for people who had not won a medal or a ribbon. And I swam in that. And by the time I hit the 15 to 18 age group, I won some ribbons. Because there were like 2 of us left swimming. Because usually by then people have moved on to more collegiate level, more competitive swimming than age group in the summer. And I recognize that. And I mean, I don't have a problem with it. My brothers are all really good athletes. 2 of them went to military academies, but they were recruited for athletics. My second brother had partial scholarship for college for lacrosse. When we moved up to Maryland, lacrosse became a big sport. So didn't play that. They do now in Louisiana, but when we lived there, we did not. So they played that. And my sister's always been a pretty good athlete as well. I just didn't get that ability from my dad.
So maybe the athletic ability wasn't embedded, but was the competitive spirit embedded?
Yeah. My family is super competitive. Sometimes a little embarrassingly so. 3 of us have the PhD. And,
wow, 3 out of 6 is pretty impressive.
Well, 1 has a JD.
One of the ones with PhD,
no.
Or is that the 4th?
So 3 PhDs, 1 JD, and then the other 2 who were military, who retired as, one of them retired as captain from the Navy and one retired as colonel from the Army, which is competitive. Both have master's degrees.
Yeah.
And so my youngest brother, or my sister, when she got her doctorate, because I guess she was the last one, the frame has to be bigger than the one who got it last.
Okay. So Diane, let's just pause right there. I love that. I don't. We start with snippets now in the recording. We don't start with my introduction. You just gave me the snippet for this. The frame has to be bigger.
Literally measuring with a measuring tape to make sure when you get it. It's not the diploma's bigger because we actually all 3 of us graduated. We all 3 got it from a University of Maryland school, so two of us from College Park, and then my sister was at the University of Maryland, Baltimore Medical School because she's in physical therapy, and she did biomechanical engineering. So the actual little diploma is probably the same, but you get a bigger mat and then a bigger frame. So it's...
You go to the frame shop and you go, the framer, the professional goes, this is going to look good in an 18 by 18. And someone in your family goes, oh, no. It's got to be 24 by 24.
Yeah, and I don't know what sizes they actually are.
Yeah,
Mine was
matter.
framed first because I got it first. So I can claim that I got the doctorate first. Although my brother with the JD keeps saying it's equivalent, and we're all going, it's not equivalent.
Well, the JD, they're looking down their nose at everybody, right?
Well, he actually never practiced law. He also had his MBA and CPA, and he worked in that realm. The law degree was sort of to buttress whatever, because he made partner in one of the big 8 accounting firms before he was 35.
Big
so
eight, I actually know
when there
about
were
that.
big 8, they're not big 8 anymore.
Yeah.
But before he was 35, so that's a pretty significant accomplishment. And we still joke about. I mean, you would think that we would not still be talking about some of this stuff, 20 years after but it comes up at the same, and my nieces and nephews are like, oh God, do we have to listen to this story again?
Yes, your
we have heard
family,
it.
you
And we're
do.
like, yeah, you do. Just get used to it.
So any of your siblings, and if you don't want to answer this is okay, but any of your siblings, could they have stopped with the master's, been just fine, but no, they went on to get the PhD because it was a family thing.
I think my youngest brother did. He struggled more in undergraduate than the rest of us. He's actually probably the smartest of us all because he was tested for the gifted and talented, and when we had, IQs. If not, he's the second smartest, and my sister is the smartest in terms of IQ levels. So he did that. Now, I will say that none of us finished college at 22 and went directly into the graduate programs and straight through. So I think that what happened is, and I certainly meandered for a long time before I got there because I was close to 40 by the time I got my doctorate. And so we all just sort of, I guess you see it becomes necessary for what you want to do, and it becomes a credential. And And my dad had his master's, which for that time was kind of unusual sort of thing. And my mom actually had gone to college and started master's, but then got married and had 6 kids. And, so.
Do the 5 of you get together for the holidays at all, or are you able to? Or?
We do sometimes because most of them have their own families. But, we still see each other. Of course, COVID kind of did that. And once the vaccine actually was out and we were all able to get it, one of my sisters-in-law, and of course they tend to be the ones who pull everybody to get, first of all, they have the house, it's big enough. We had something, we all stayed outside and mostly in their backyard and stuff, and my sister drove down from Pennsylvania. She's a professor at Drexel, and so she drove down with her son from Philadelphia because it had been, I guess, a year and a half since we'd all seen each other. We did some family Zooms and stuff. Not all the nieces and nephews come anymore because they're now they're all, except for my sister's child, who's still in high school, are grown and out on their own careers. And so one's in California, one's in Colorado. I have a nephew who's a Marine pilot. He's now back in North Carolina, but he was in San Diego and then on ships for a couple of years. So they were all kind of scattering to do their own things. We do. The siblings try to get together.
I wanted to ask you, because if the 5 of you get together, I wonder if, the family gathering would be, okay, so I've got an intelligence test. We're all going to take it. Here's a 60-minute time test. Go. And that's the activity at Christmas or New Year's.
No, but I don't play games with them anymore because my brothers get to, and the issue is that for the 5 of us, the oldest 5, including my brother that passed away, there's 7.5 years difference between me and my youngest brother.
Oh, so that's a whole nother layer.
Right. And then my sister was a few years we like to call her the afterthought, but it was more, my mother had trouble. She had a couple of miscarriages and things. I mean, they wanted children. They wanted more children. They tried to adopt when we moved up to Maryland, but they told my parents that they wanted to adopt some older children so she wouldn't grow up as an only child. They said my dad was too old because he was over 40, and they wouldn't let. I'm sitting here going, you got a perfectly stable family that's not, but that's another whole issue to discuss. So the boys, I mean, there's barely a year and a half in between them, and so, and they played the same sports. They wrestled, they played football. They are hyper competitive, and I swear the number of children they had, it was because this many, I could match that many. I don't think that's the case, but we used to joke about it. Oh, they're having another one. Is this one going to have another one too?
Oh my gosh.
So they will play, I don't know, Monopoly or whatever, and they sometimes just get a wee bit too competitive for my taste. So I let them do that. But yeah, there's definitely, of course, we're all, like I said, we're getting older, and so some of it is a little more subtle and a little less, but gosh, even into their 20s, they would still be doing physical wrestling or other kinds of things. I mean, it's just...
Yeah, there's 8.5 years between my sister and me. I'm the baby of the family. And my parents were always very kind to say about me, I was a surprise and not a mistake. So I'm used to that language. Yeah.
And she really wasn't, because my mother wanted a baseball team and wasn't able to have it.
She wanted 9?
Yes.
Wow.
And wasn't able to have it. We all sit here and go, oh my God, we got enough as it
So
is.
can I tell by context, and I will apologize if I have to, but because of the places that you worked, that you grew up as a Catholic family?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. My dad was born and raised Catholic from New Orleans, and South Louisiana is heavily Catholic.
Okay.
My mom actually converted when I was a senior in high school.
Wow. That's a big process for an adult to convert.
At that, now it is more of a process.
Oh, okay.
I think the priest in our parish just talked to her a few times. I mean, she'd been teaching, CCD and everything. I mean, she'd raised 6 kids who were altar boys and had all gone through confirmation, First Communion, all the other stuff. She had just never converted because her dad was an elder in the Presbyterian Church.
Oh, okay.
And which, if people don't know, that's a fairly high position for a layperson. And I guess she was afraid that, I don't know, he might say something. I don't even know if she ever told him that she converted. I mean, I think she must have at some point.
Oh, her own father?
Yeah, but they lived in Louisiana, so that was it. They weren't going to see each other, but I mean, so my parents had been married for, must have been close to 20 years, well, 19 years at that point, because I was born 10 months after they got married. So
you're the oldest?
I am the oldest.
Okay. I want to switch gears a little bit and tell me about when you got to PGCC.
Well, I had been teaching in South Carolina. I had found a full-time job, small liberal arts college. I didn't really fit in South Carolina either. And so this is the 90s by then. But I didn't really fit. But my dad had surgery, had cancer and had surgery. And so obviously, when I came back home that next summer, it was kind of clear that something wasn't quite right. And he had retired for the second time, maybe a year before. But something just wasn't right. So I began noticing things, and I began to suspect he had Alzheimer's or some other form of dementia. Mm-hmm. And over the years, I suspect that he was asked to retire the second time. I have a feeling, just based on having talked to a couple of people who were his junior people that we knew really well, I think he missed a deadline on something that was pretty important, because it was the early stages and sometimes it's hard to tell. Right. So I left South Carolina. I moved back up to Maryland. I spent a year taking him to get him diagnosed and making sure what was going on. I mean, all over the area, all different kinds of tests. And then I had to get all the legal documents after speaking with his doctors, and it's, as everybody knows, it's a diagnosis of omission. You eliminate everything else.
Right.
And it doesn't really matter what the diagnosis, I mean, at that point, there really was no treatment. And so I had to get all the legal documents in order before we did that. My mother was happy to let me. I handled him better than she did.
It's hard for the spouse. It's so hard.
Well, and he would listen to me. I discovered at some point that I looked like his mother when
Really?
So I guess and my grandmother died when I was 5, so he would have been maybe 35. And so he would listen when I told him things, and I did some questions because I'm like, why is he paying attention to me? He won't pay attention to anybody else. I think it, and we know that those long-term memories don't go. And we didn't have a lot of pictures of her because it was expensive to take pictures and get them developed.
Yeah.
And so people, we didn't have phones that, people took thousands of pictures. I had asked somebody, and they said, yeah, you kind of look like his mother looked when she was younger and stuff. So I think it was some, not to get Freudian, but some transference things going on. But thank God he listened to somebody, because otherwise we'd have had a real mess. And so we got him diagnosed. I then found a couple of adjunct positions at various places. I actually taught for a full year at the Community College of Baltimore County in Catonsville, but they didn't have tenure. They eliminated it, and I was the only person in the department without tenure who would never get tenure, because people who had it got to keep it. And then PG had, and I had adjuncted at PGCC. Full-time position was advertised. They had tenure. I applied and got the job, and so I moved from there.
Not every community college has a tenure system.
They do not.
Yeah.
Not even everyone in Maryland has tenure system.
Okay.
I did that and just sort of found my place. Because when I taught, I always liked working with students who I wasn't interested in teaching only the students who were the best and brightest and were going to go on and get into a doctoral program, without any help or whatever. And so it just worked out. Schedule-wise, because we had so many students, we gave classes basically around the clock at that point. So it made it much easier to work in a family situation I was not as locked into. And I had been trained to teach online at University of Maryland, now Global Campus, used to be University College. And PGCC was just starting some online stuff, and so that played into my being hired there, because I had the experience teaching, and then online sort of blew up, and
How long have you been there?
I have been there 22 or 23 years.
Okay. All right. And then when did you start? Do you pronounce it Maytop?
Yes.
When did you start Maytop?
Well, I didn't actually start it. We had.
I'm sorry.
I've been doing it for about 23 years now.
Okay.
The very first one was started by a meeting was called by a professor at Howard Community College, which is local, and he brought professors from other community colleges. I don't think there were any 4-year schools there at that point, but now it's 26 years, so it's kind of hard to remember. For like a day of meetings, because there really wasn't anything local. And stuff, and then somehow somebody at PG decided that we should run a day-long sort of thing the next year, and I was involved but not running it. And then the next year, I'm not going to name the person who was our chair, and said, "Here, you can take this over." So you can probably guess who that was.
Oh, okay, sure.
And,
yes. Now you've given me the clue.
And
sure.
so,
yes, I can.
I'm not tenured. I think it was my 3rd year there. So I took it over, and it sort of kept going.
And I guess for our listeners, would you say the full name of the?
It's the Mid-Atlantic Teaching of Psychology
Thank
Conference.
you. And I will, full disclosure, Diane asked me out one year, and I was very pleased to go out and be a speaker.
We were thrilled to have you.
Well, it was delightful. And that's where I became acquainted. I think that's where I became acquainted with Bruegger's. Am I saying the name right?
Oh, Burgers.
Burgers, thank you.
Burgers Cookies.
Oh my God! I'm not going to have any more time for anything. We can't go down that road. They're amazing. Let's not go there. Yeah. Before we run out of time, Diane, your presidential term starts in January.
Yes.
Would you mind mentioning a little bit about your presidential task forces and maybe how people can get involved if there's still a chance to get involved?
Well, first of all, there's still a chance to get involved because I'm not exactly sure when I put out the call for people to join them.
You're the president. You get to do whatever you want.
There's a timetable for these things, so I have to find this out because I just talked about them at the executive committee meeting yesterday.
Oh, awesome.
And I do because they have to. I don't know if they have to be officially approved or you just sort of have to talk to them, the executive committee. I still haven't figured out all of this stuff because there's apparently stuff that I have to do at next year's ACT conference, and I'll see Linda Wolf doing something. I'm going, am I going to have to do that next year? Yeah. Okay. Could we have a list of some of that, like when you agree to run, that all of this is part of it? But that's another thing. But I have two major ones that I'm going to hopefully set up, and there will be calls for applicants to join on the STP website. I'm sure they'll put them out on the listserv. It'll be in the electronic TOP newsletter that comes out, sort of thing. And they're both very similar, but I'm going to have two groups because I think they need it. And I have a theme, and I didn't bring it with me. It's sort of like inviting everybody in kind of thing. Mm-hmm. We don't have, as far as we know, and granted, we don't really have the demographic information for lots of reasons. We don't have a huge number of community college members in STP or a huge number of members from historically black colleges and universities, minority serving institutions, and tribal colleges and universities, so the HBCU, MSIs, and TCUs. So I'm going to have two task forces that will be composed primarily of people from those types of institutions to look at, first of all, how many members do we actually have?
Sure.
How can we better advertise STP to those? Because I really think, and I've talked about this for years. People don't know we exist, that you can join for just $25 and you don't have to join APA. And they don't know all the benefits of joining, like all the grants and all kinds of other things that you can do. And I think for a lot of those kinds of institutions, service on these sorts of committees gets big red yay, yay, yay in tenure and promotion or continuing contract sorts of things. And I don't know why we don't have them. We do have members from those types of institutions, but a lot of them are not engaged. And so is there something that we're not doing that we could do? So ultimately, when they come up with reports, we would work with membership committee and programming and other kinds of things to address whatever recommendations they might make. So that, the charge will be really exactly the same, and I would hope the chairs would work together to come up with common plans instead of doing double work. But I think it's better to ask those questions with people from those types of institutions who would have a better understanding of what's going on there. And then I also want to set up I don't know whether it'll be a working group or task force or whatever, working with CABE, which is Committee on Associate and Baccalaureate Education, from the Education Directorate of American Psychological Association. So we get all kinds of acronyms in there. We started a project back when I was serving on CABE based on the skillful psychology student.
Nice.
Which I also think a lot of people don't know about. And I created little blurbs for each of my syllabi that lists the specific skills from the skillful psychology student that they will gain in this course. So if it's a research methods course, one of the skills, and I'm not remembering the name correctly, but it has to do with being able to critically think about research and everything else. You're going to do a research project from at this point in the course that will get you this skill, so that when they go out, they can tell employers or graduate schools exactly what skills they have and how they got them. So they can create a little portfolio if they want of the materials and if they keep it. Now, I honestly don't know if students are reading it, but you can only do what you can do.
Right.
But I think it would be nice to have templates for the major courses that we teach. So intro, the courses that are kind of common, of course, all things, abnormal, the various developmental, social psych, and then people can take and modify them based on what they're doing in their course. Because I like takeaways, and I think most people like things that they can use. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, so we're doing that. And then kind of related to that, so I'm hoping we can get that set up. And I had talked to a couple of people on CABE, maybe at APA, and they seemed interested. So hopefully we can, and I think there should be more working between STP and CABE, because we're kind of working at the same things. And let's see if we can not duplicate and combine energies and stuff. And I think the one other thing which I had mentioned to them is I really want to look at the reports from the task forces for the last 2 or 3 presidents and see how we can better get people to know that they're out there, and particularly the ones that are having classroom activities and things that teachers can actually use. Because again, we announce it that it's there, and I don't know how often it's actually used. And so I mentioned at the executive committee meeting, I would be talking to some of the other vice presidents just to kind of see what ideas some of their committees might have on how come. Because again, we've got so much stuff that's good stuff that people can use, and they just don't know it's there. I don't know what all's there, because I'm still finding things that, we have that.
Well, there's a couple things. First off, we are happy at Psych Sessions to promote these things.
Okay.
And we will drop in the show notes. And honestly, I could see a little spin-off series within Psych Sessions about STP resources. And we could feature one a month where it's an instructional resource. Yeah. And here it is, a spotlight on a task force report that has, the new statistical research findings and, one of, I don't know if it was Amy Feinberg's or Susan Nolan's task forces. I mean, so first off, you're right. It's so overwhelming. I think the STP website tagging project was working on that.
The tagging project has finished, and there is now there are a couple of ways you can find stuff. You can go to the page, and there's a word cloud where you can click on somebody was, the size of the word depends on how many times it's mentioned in the resources. It doesn't have anything to do with importance or anything else. Right. It's strictly however the program is, if it's mentioned so many times. Or you can type in a phrase. There's a search box at the top. But I mean, I know, because I know when you were president, you had a task force on use of narrative.
Right,
and I know that I've emailed a couple of things that I've seen subsequently. I'm going, isn't this what your task force wrote about and did? And so it's out now in other publications or other
and there was
listservs.
An ebook, yeah.
And it's why is this look, here's something new, the use of narrative. And I'm going, I could swear I saw this a few years ago. And so I think we have so much stuff that it's overwhelming, and people aren't aware of it. And I think that we need to think about some way to promote some of the things. And again, some of that goes back to people not promoting themselves. I think another one would be to promote some of it on Twitter. And I think they're going to be, I don't know if that's one of the positions that's changing, but certainly the STP tweeter or Twitter person or whatever we call them, and they've got to be looking for stuff to tweet about.
Yeah, and there's plenty out there to be written about and tweets. But Diane, one of the things that I love listening to you hear about your very first idea about bringing together those institutions, that harkens me back to when you were VP of membership and all the work that you were doing back then. Either I was secretary or I was in the presidential trio years, and remembering the great work that you did
well, thank you.
As VP of membership.
Yeah. Recruitment, retention, and public relations.
Well, I think I was on when we changed that.
Because I kept going, it's too long.
It was too long.
And stuff.
But I mean, that's the theme that you've been working on, I would say, for maybe a decade, right?
Yeah, at least. And part of it comes about because I had been involved in STP and the advanced placement readings. And so, I was pretty involved in things. And I remember being invited to a meeting. I want to say it was the APA in Hawaii, but I could be wrong on that. And it might have been Council of Undergraduate Psychology Programs. And somebody who was on that group said, come on with us, because at that point we actually had a psychology degree. We're going back to it. It sometime over the last few years, it slipped into a gen ed with concentration in psychology. But now the provost just decided, no, we need actual degrees. And we're going, we had one. So now we're having to do all this stupid paperwork with the state to get it back, but that's another problem. So he said, come on and go with us. And so we're sitting in the meeting, and somebody flat out said, well, what are you doing here? You're community college. You can't possibly have a psychology program. And I said, well, we have 10 full-time faculty, and we have 2 students who've come out of our program who earned Truman scholarships, or fellowships. I didn't add how many have your students earned, but I just and stuff. And so there's still that academic prejudice that community college faculty are only there because they couldn't get a job at a, quote, real school. And
no, it is still there,
and
I believe.
So, having felt it personally, and I think, those things really annoy me. And because I was not, and I think having gotten my doctorate later and moved into some of this stuff much later in my life, I'm not a 26-year-old just starting out, or 27-year-old just, I finished my doctorate and I'm 27. No, I've been out because in between things I worked for a company that manages homeowners associations. I've worked we like to say, quote, real jobs.
Well, you've done consultancies.
I've done but I've worked quote, real jobs where, you had to be there at 8:30 in the morning and you got a half hour for lunch. And
I would like to believe that snobbery between community college faculty and four-year faculty is lesser in the psychology realm. It's still there, I think.
At STP, it's lesser.
I hope so. I don't want to be naive and say it's not there.
Right. And I'm sure that there are some more senior faculty who probably still hold some of those. I don't know. I haven't encountered any of it recently, and clearly I got elected, so it's not like I hid my academic affiliation on anything. So if they read anything, they would have seen the affiliation. But we still have the word community in our name. So unlike some other places where they've dropped that, so that you'd have to be from that area to know that.
Well, Highline Community College is now Highline College, for one example.
And stuff. And so, of course, they're now offering a bachelor's degree. I think it's in conjunction with some four-year school, but they actually are offering a bachelor's degree. And there are some two-year schools who have been able to do that.
Yeah.
I can't even get our state to let us teach research methods and transfer it, but that's another issue.
Isn't that crazy?
And stuff. And so that's another 20-year quest that I'm on. So So I really haven't found that as much in STP and stuff, but certainly in the larger realm of, four-year institutions, particularly R1 kinds of things, it's still there. And, and a lot of those faculty, they're teaching one course. So they're not teaching the students that we teach.
Right.
And so, And so I just, I don't have a problem with confronting that. I confront things with school that junior faculty can't confront when things are just, because I understand that because I have tenure and because I've been there so long and because I frankly can walk in the door and say, I quit.
Right.
Out of here now. Bye.
With a smile on your face.
Yes. Yeah. So I know I have that backup, and, I have good student evaluations, although we've just started evaluating online classes. They couldn't figure out how to do it for 10 years. I had suggestions on how we could do it, but those were ignored. And so until COVID and everybody had to go online, they finally figured out, everybody can do evaluations online.
How about that?
Surprise, surprise. So, I've got that. I'm just not in a position where I have to worry about it because I do my stuff. I've got the professional stuff. I've got, teaching things to back me up. And they would have a hard time getting rid of me on cause.
Nothing to worry about.
So I don't really have to worry about it. It's just kind of freeing. I no longer have to say yes to things because I'm not tenured or I don't know what the dean might say, sort of thing. And so it does allow me to do, and I feel an obligation. I mean, they used to call me the curmudgeon before the pandemic when we had in-person meetings because I was constantly popping my hand up asking about things, going, excuse me, that doesn't sound like a new evaluation plan. That sounds like you want to get rid of tenure. I read this thing, isn't that what? Oh, no, that's not what it means. I'm going, well, that's what it says. So,
good for you.
And, because everybody else is going, yay.
So, Diane, we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you, was there anything that you wanted to mention or I haven't covered that you said, oh, I'm going to do this podcast. I want to be sure to mention X. Is there any, do you want to solve for X?
I just would hope that everybody would understand there's a place for them in STP and that there's some, we always talk about leadership and the in-group. I would not be in leadership positions if it was only the in-group, because when I was called to run for the VP of membership 10 years ago, whenever it was early on a Sunday morning, and I'm going, you want me to do what? I was never part of what was perceived as the in-group at STP. I still don't think I am. I just sort of a worker bee. I've done my dad was, if you're on time, you're late. You work. He came from a single parent home. He knew what had to be. He was the oldest as well, so a lot of that got passed down, and you just kind of do your job. I think I got on task forces. I did what they asked. I turned in stuff that I was supposed to turn in, and so I think, if you want to get involved, there's a place, and don't be afraid to approach the executive committee or somebody who's chair of any one of the committees, of all those names that are on the STP website. If you scroll through and click everything, there's a place, and I think, for high school teachers, for community college, we're all just teachers. And like, for instance, at Maytop, when I run it, I don't put any titles on the badges. I've never used the titles because I don't want anybody to feel intimidated, because I tell them, earning the doctorate is really just a matter of persistence.
I think you're right. Yeah.
It's not that you have to be stupendously smart. I think you have to have a certain level of smart in education, but I'm certainly not the smartest in my family. But I'm pretty persistent, and I kept doing everything I needed to do, and I had incomplete. I had to confront a professor who they couldn't agree on a grade. It was team taught, and I'm like, just give me a damn B. I don't care. I got to get out of here. You're holding me up with this I because you can't agree whether I should have an A or B. I don't care. Give me the B. So I think you have to not be afraid to volunteer to do things. And if you don't get chosen for one thing, there's plenty of other things going on. And that's the only way to make STP a broader audience, a broader group, and stuff, because sometimes the same people get asked to do things because other people aren't volunteering.
Yeah. Can I just say something? Two things. One is, you talk about you're not part of the in-group, or you feel like you're not, and you get to have your perceptions, and I won't argue with you about that. But maybe the in-group is broader than what people think, because you've been a key player in STP for a long time. I have a long memory of you being a key player when I was secretary and you were VP, and now you're president.
Yeah. Well, I guess I kind of think of in-group as, it's like some people have known each other for a really long time, and I think sometimes people see like the in-group as they're going out to dinner together, or they're doing XYZ together, at conferences and at APA and other things. Yeah. And so I've never really been a part of that. Yeah. And I don't really care. But I think somebody who's not volunteered for anything or not gotten in, and that's why I say, I was on task forces. I just did my work. Yeah. And I think when you're looking for people to run for offices, you want somebody who you've seen has done some work and is going to follow through with what they do. And I think just because, like I said, I'm a worker bee, that's my phrase, right, that people brought me, into things because they knew I would do the work.
But I think part of that also, that in-group thing, is also partly introversion, extroversion?
And I think it's not like it was when I first got involved. I think it's because we've broadened who's involved in leadership and everything else. Because I think it did exist when I first got involved in STP.
Sure.
And again, it's just they're the people who really got STP up and running, even though it's been in existence for like ever because it's Division 2. So it's been around
since the 40s.
Since forever, because the numbers indicate when things were founded. Yeah. But I think it was probably more like 70s, 80s where it really took off and became really much more focused on teaching, even though that's the name. I gather it was not as teaching focused as before. And so, those people get to be friends,
right,
and stuff. And I mean, I'm comfortable with most of the people, and I've done things, but it's just I think a lot of times at early conferences you would see even at like social hours, and now I think we do try to be cognizant of not like.
I know exactly what you're saying.
So it's not necessarily in group, out group like the popular kids in high school are not. It's not just one group that runs STP, and I think we're all very much trying to get other people involved. I know I've approached a few people here about, okay, we've got these openings. I think you would fit in this really well. But the bottom line is I can't make anybody apply for any positions. Right. And so, I just want to encourage everybody to look at where you can put your strengths. And the other reality is a lot of us who are in these leadership positions now, I used to tell the early career psychologist people, because we started the committee when I was vice president for membership, we want to train our replacements. And I've loved seeing some of them move into really high-level leadership positions. Mm-hmm. And I used to tell them that all the time, that I just, I don't want to be doing this, for my entire life. It doesn't mean I can't come and see people and chat and go to sessions, but it comes a time when people have to take over the leadership. And I think you kind of have to train people or get people, when I say train, you've got to give them some experiences that would let them be able to be successful at the higher levels, so they're familiar with a lot of the stuff that's going on. And so I think we've got some great ECP and younger, newer. I like to say newer because I came in at a much older age than a lot of people do. And so I think sometimes it's intimidating, but I'm just from I won't say a small community college. We got 10,000, 12,000 students. I haven't published any peer-reviewed journal articles.
But it's not part of your job requirement.
No, and it was never anything I wanted to do. I review for peer-reviewed journals.
And Diane, I'll bet if you wanted to, you could sit down and do that.
I probably could.
I'll bet you could.
Or at least I could have when I was much more familiar with statistics than I am now.
Or you could find a collaborator to
true.
do the stats.
It's just, I've written non-peer-reviewed things. It's just not my area. And I think you have to identify what are you interested in. Yeah. And I was more interested in working with students and,
and contributing to the discipline through service.
I've had students who have gone on and gotten their doctorates and stuff. And so it's, I had one who won the Red Dress Award, which is a big award given for work related to women's heart health. It's from one of the magazines, I think Women's Day or something. She received it the same year that Dr. Sanjay Gupta did. Wow. And I found her on I saw it. I was in my doctor's office. I'm going, is this my name?
Yeah.
And I actually found her on Facebook. And so I sent a message saying, did you go to PGCC? And she goes, Dr. Finley. I'm like, okay, you can call me Diane. We're beyond. You don't have to call me. So, and I had seen her through her, when she had transferred to the four-year school, and she presented at APA because I had bugged them about they needed to do that. And so, it's fun to watch them do that and stuff. And so I kind of look at some of the ECP and GSTA people, because I worked with them as well, you try to encourage them, but we need to be training our replacements, building our replacements, because we're not going to be here forever. And
that's the rumor on the street.
Yeah, I mean, well, the other issue is, do you really want to be doing this when you're 80 years old?
Right.
I mean, it comes a point where you have to sort of move into another stage. And again, you can still come and visit with everybody and go to sessions, but without having to do all the work.
That's right. Diane, thank you so much. I'm
You're
going to be
welcome.
rooting for you and cheering for you in the coming year during your
thank you.
presidential year.
Yeah, I keep going, what am I doing now?
You know what you're doing.
Well,
you absolutely know what you're doing.
I know some of what I'm doing, but I keep finding out all these other things I have to do.
But you have a great EC.
Oh, yeah.
You have an executive director.
Yes.
It sounds like you're going to have an assistant executive director.
We are, because
In the
his
process.
position has just gotten so big.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and the reality is, he's not going to stay in that position forever. And to facilitate a smooth transition, you really need to not have to bring in somebody brand new who doesn't have any understanding of, that's why you have vice presidents before they're, it's so that
Succession
you can get
planning.
a sense. It's because if you don't, really in trouble. And I mean, Lord knows that none of us really know everything that Tom does. When you try to get him to list everything,
Amen to that.
It's like, okay, what, and so it's and I know he likes what he does, but he doesn't want to do that forever.
Yeah, I mean, succession planning is really important. Psychi did it a few years ago, and it was a really good exercise
and stuff. And so, yeah, I'm not really worried. I'm just not quite as. I don't have some of the really super broader interests that some of our recent past presidents have had.
That's
because
okay.
that's but I'm hoping that people will see that you don't have to necessarily be really huge intellectuals. And I mean, I think we're all sort of intellectual, because otherwise we wouldn't be doing this, but there are levels of that within sort of thing. I'm just much more pragmatic about a lot of things, and some of that's come as I've gotten older.
Getting stuff done is a good trait to have.
Yeah, it's the older you get, sometimes the more pragmatic you get about choices and things and what has to be done. And but I'm all for having a lot of younger people who really are more idealistic and more whatever than like I was when I was much younger, kind of thing. So I want everybody just to get involved and recognize that it's their organization. It's not my organization.
That's a great note to end on. Diane, thank you so much for your
You're
time.
welcome. Thank you for having
Thanks.
me.